Hi guys, it's time for a new video in the educational series where I explain how I use the brighter data to my advantage in my trading. In the first video we talked about the time statistics, where and when will a low or high be put in and which significance can that bring with it. The second video we talked about the distance statistics, so the more price goes up, the less likely it is to take out the low. So with that data we know how likely a certain low is to hold. And now we go into the last part, which is the pivot zones. Here you can quickly see it already. This is a very easy and quick way to identify POIs on the chart. I basically use it every day to see what it shows me. So let's get into it. First of all, it's important that you know what the P1s and P2s are. So definitely go check out the former videos if you haven't checked them, because without that knowledge, it will be a bit difficult to understand what the pivot zones are. So let's get into it. First, quickly, let me show you the time. Currently, we see that P1 is at hour 0. By now, we know hour 0 is a strong low, and the daily high is now at hour 12. So we know that the low is it's more likely to hold. So good to have that in mind. Now let's get into the data. What are the pivot zones? Let me start by showing you the daily pivot zones. Like you can see, we have this inner part. Let me call it like that. The more dark gray part, and then we have the upper part right here, the lighter gray, and the lower part. Basically, to not make it too difficult is the explanation that this zone is what we call the P1 zone, so the pivot 1 zone, and then this upper section is the P2 zone, and the same is true for this lower section. What it basically shows is that in 80%, so let's say between this and this, in 80% of the cases, the P1 will be formed within this box. So as we can see here, the daily open was in this candle, and then 80% of the P1s will happen in this grayer dark box, and then 80% of the P2s. So for example, now we can see our P1 was slightly below the box. Let's just say that it is still near the box. So I call this as a very good P1, especially since it's at hour 0 and it is near the box. And then that means that if we have a bullish day, oftentimes we see that the low gets formed early and then we go up, or the high gets formed early in the day and then we go down. Well, in this case, we started the day, directly went down, put in the P1 at hour 0 and near our P1 zone, and from there we pushed up. So in 80% of the cases, this will be our low right now. And then if we have a bullish day, like we have for now, we can see that price already entered our P2 zone. And that means that in 80% of the cases, our P2 will be formed in this box. So what you then can expect from here, for example, is that we at least make our way, if we are bullish, to the beginning of the upper box, and the maximum, or at least in 80% of the cases, price will, let me erase that, will not extend beyond this level. So we know that if we are bullish, this is likely to be our low for the day, and it's pretty likely, at least in 80% of the cases, that price will not exceed this level. So what this tells me for today, for example, is that I'm pretty certain that this low will hold, because we formed it in our P1 zone at our support level. What is also important to know is that this level acts as support, and then this level acts as resistance. For some reason, it's probably that because the algorithms are working with data as well. For some reason, if price comes here, it often acts as support, as well as here it acts as resistance, and then when it's flipped, so here we flip it, then often cases it acts as a demand zone. It's a bit like a support and resistance flip. Also here, when we go into P2 zone, then oftentimes a backtest of this results for some reason in a rejection again. Same is true for here. This acts as resistance and this acts as support. Back to what it tells me for today is that this low is likely to hold. And in that case, if you think this low will hold, then we can make a conclusion that it's very likely that price will make its way into this upper box. However, for now, we can see that price is already reached the higher part of the box right here. So right now, would I be looking for a long in this area? Not really. The reason for that is that, first of all, the bigger context is always key. So I see that we are in a big supply zone, so that's not the best area to get involved. And then if we just look at the P1 zones, let me clean it up a bit, we are already at the higher part of our P2 zone. So if I, for example, want to go long here, then the maximum upside will be this box, because in 80% of the cases, we will close in this box. So yeah, is it worthy from a risk to reward point of view to expect that we will go for that 20% case that we get out of this box? For me, not. So this gives me a pretty good overview that I might look for a scalp long down here and then look for higher again, but this is not the place where I am going to look for longs. So basically it shows you that this is your maximum for the day to look, and then you will always want to look for confluences with supply, or in the lower part if this aligns with the demand zone. that's always a good confluence. We have this for the daily. We also have it for the weekly. So let me show you the weekly statistics. Like here, if we zoom a bit out, we can see that we opened the week right here on Sunday, late Sunday and then Monday. And then we pushed up, we hit the P1 zone. So for the weekly, it works exactly the same as for the daily. And then we went down. So we have our high on Monday and we now have our low on Tuesday. And look where price bounced from the P1 support. And we reject from the P1 resistance. So right now you can ask yourself which one is more likely to hold, because both this one is a pretty good high and this is a pretty good low to put in your P1 for the week, because pretty logical, you will put in your P1 on almost always on Monday or Tuesday, sometimes on Wednesday, but now it's more likely to look for what are we going to do from here. Are we going to go, do we have a bullish week? Then we can aim to reach at least this level and then look for a high to be formed somewhere here. So for now this might be the high, but then we can look, what if this is indeed the high? Then we can look for confluence as well. What I see here, we of course have the range we broke down from, then here we have a local range, but the trend is heavily down. So if we zoom out, we can see that this is our former consolidation zone. There are a lot of levels, point of control and stuff like that. I'm not going to go into that in this video, but here we have a massive demand zone. So that's a level of interest for me on the higher time frame. And then if we look for the weekly on the P2 zone, then we can see that this lower part perfectly aligns with a tap into that higher time frame demand zone, which means that if we reach this, I'm very interested here to look for longs. First of all, because we reach a high time frame demand zone, and because on a weekly it is very unlikely for price to exceed this box, because in 80% of the cases we will stay within this box. So that are nice confluences to look for, and then the same can be done for the upside. If this is our low and we continue moving up from here, then we can look for moves towards 90k, but we already know it's not very likely that we will make a bigger move above 90k. So it also gives me some rest, because I know if, for example, price is trading here, am I gonna look for longs here targeting 100k? No, it's not likely. What is more likely is that we then stay within this range and then maybe next week go for those higher targets. So it gives you a quick overview of what your POIs can be, your levels of interest. For example, here the P1 is aligning with the supply zone, so that's important to note. Here we are at the weekly in a demand zone, so it quickly gives you POI zones. And then it's always important to align it with your technical analysis, because statistics are nice, but you want to align them with your overall view. So if we go back to the daily, we can see that here we are currently, this low is likely to hold in my opinion. So, but we are also at the extreme of the P2 zone. We are in supply. So this is not the place where I'm looking for longs. What I'm looking for, which is more interesting, is that we now tapped into supply. So we could say that this supply is being mitigated. Then for today, I'm not interested in longs, but maybe for tomorrow, since we took that supply, and this could potentially be our weekly low. So let me get back to the weekly pivot zones. It shows me that I might be interested to look for a higher low compared to this low, and then expect this low to be our weekly low, because this is our it's at our P1 zone, so this could very well be a low. Then if we form a higher low, we can aim for a move into this box, because we already mitigated this supply zone. So now we could say here we locally broke structure. What if we form a higher low here? Then we can aim for a move into, or at least towards 90k, and we also have liquidity here. So for this week, that is my expectation right now. And on the other hand, if we fail to put in the higher low, then it's very likely that this move on Monday was already our high, and then we break lower, and then I will be very interested in longs from this extreme P2 zone and that demand zone. So that's a bit how I use the pivot zones, just to see where can we move to, and also helps you to reduce emotions, because like last week we were very bearish and price was at the extreme zone right here. But a lot of people then get very bearish, but just quick look at the pivot zone shows me that it's not likely for price to make a much bigger move downside when we are already at our weekly P2 zone. So what happened is that last week we started the week towards the extreme immediately, and then we get a mean reversion, we got higher, and then eventually we went lower again. But it shows that oftentimes you can look for mean reversion plays from the extreme zones. So here you can look for longs, because it's very unlikely for price to make a bigger move to the downside. You always want to wait at least for some confirmation, so don't blindly do it, but in 9 out of the 10 cases you will have the possibility to enter a nice long there and then close it back somewhere in this zone. Same is true when you are to the upside, but then it's a bit, you have to align it with other things. But if you take important liquidity, push outside of the box, then you can look for quick scalp shorts to ride it back to this area. So that's quickly how I use the pivot zones. We have this for every asset, so now now we are looking at it for Bitcoin. Bitcoin is, especially in the current market conditions, the most important one to monitor because it's the king. But you can basically use it for every coin. So we can also look what it shows for ETH, for example. So if we look at the weekly for ETH, we can see that, let me clear that supply zone for a moment, that we started our week here. We went up early in the week, rejected by our P1 zone, once again, just like Bitcoin did. And then ETH is much more bearish as Bitcoin, directly went to the lower part. And here we bounced from our P2 zone, just above weekly demand. So that's something I keep in mind. But here you can directly again see that the levels are being respected pretty well. What is price doing now? Price bounced from the extreme P2 zone, came back up, and is now seeing a rejection from the P1 zone again. So if I look at ETH and I have to make a conclusion based on the pivot zones, then I would say it looks a bit, it looks more bearish, because this high looks very good to hold, and we already entered the lower part of the P2 zone. So in this case, it's for ETH pretty likely to hold this high, and then you can say that this high is likely to hold, and this low is also pretty likely to hold. Altcoins just follow what Bitcoin does. So because a bigger distance from here is not very likely. So what could happen is that we quickly sweep that low into demand and then push up. But overall, I wouldn't be surprised if this remains our high, we more or less form our low here, and that we chop between these levels. Because early in the week we already made our high at the extreme zone, P1 zone. We already hit the P2 zone, so would not be surprised to see ranging price action between those levels. Then a quick view what the daily is showing us. Here the daily is showing us also pretty interesting. We started the day bearishly, we bounced from the P2 zone, came up, also rejected from the extreme of the P1 zone, and are now in the middle more or less. So for the day, what am I expecting? Well, we both hit the extreme of the low and the extreme of the high. So for today, I'm expecting some ranging price action, nothing more, nothing less, because it's unlikely to make a bigger move and also unlikely to make a move below it. So expecting some ranging price action right here. Well, I hope now it's clear what the pivot zone signs. So when you now see this box on a chart of mine, you can directly see, hey, this bounce from P1, that looks like a good low. And if we are trading right here, this is not the place to look for longs, rather maybe for scalp shorts. I will always share my thoughts with it when I share a post, but I thought it would be important for people to at least know what the pivot zones are, but also what the time and distance statistics are. So now that I recorded this video as well, I will go into more examples with my market overviews, and then I can share how I see it with the time statistics, how I combine that with the pivot zones and with distance statistics, and then of course also with my own TA. But for the people that follow me, I think now you know what you need to know. So if you have any more questions, just let me know in the comments, and then from here on forward I will go more to market outlooks and also some other educational stuff. If you have suggestions, please let me know, and then I want to thank you for watching once again, and see you in the next video.